Graduation week arrived with the weight of 6 months pressing down on everyone in the Predator Combat Division. The students who had survived this far were harder than they had been, sharper, more deadly. They had been forged in fire and blood, and they knew it. The final assessment was a tradition as old as the division itself. Each student would face Instructor Reckon in single combat. Victory was not the goal. No student had ever defeated him, and none ever would. He was a Korthax in his prime, a living weapon built by evolution and refined by decades of experience. The purpose of the assessment was to demonstrate Predator spirit. Students were expected to fight with everything they had until Vrecken forced them to submit. Those who fled, or froze or broke under pressure would fail. Those who fought with sufficient ferocity would pass. It was a simple test of will and violence. One by one, the Predator students entered the combat arena. Keth attacked with all 8 limbs in a furious barrage that lasted nearly 10 minutes before Vrecken caught him in a hold that forced submission. Tessic used her speed and venom to evade and strike for almost 15 minutes before she was finally pinned. Soreth's small size let him avoid direct contact for nearly 20 minutes. But eventually, Vrecken cornered him, and the Drennics had no choice but to yield. All of them passed. All of them had shown the Predator spirit that the assessment demanded. Then it was the humans' turn. Una Park walked into the arena and looked up at the massive Korthax who stood waiting for her. Vrecken had removed his outer armor for this assessment. He wanted his students to see him as he truly was. Scales like black glass covered his body. Claws that could shred starship hulls extended from his hands. His 4 eyes reflected the arena lights like windows into deep space. He was everything that evolution had made to dominate and kill. Una raised her guard. She was wearing the standard training uniform. She had no weapons. She had no armor. She had nothing except the same stubborn refusal to yield that had carried her through 6 impossible months. Vrecken felt something stir in his chest as he looked at her. He did not want to hurt this creature. He respected what she had accomplished, but the assessment required submission. He had to push her until she broke or gave up. Those were the only options. He attacked. The first blow sent her skidding across the arena floor. She got up. The second blow knocked the wind from her lungs and left her gasping. She got up. The third blow split her lip, and blood ran down her chin. She got up. Vrecken increased the pressure. He hit harder. He moved faster. He used techniques designed to overwhelm opponents and force quick submission. She kept getting up. 10 minutes passed. Her nose was bleeding now. One of her eyes had swollen, partially shut. Bruises were forming across her arms, where she had blocked strikes that would have shattered bones in lesser creatures. She kept getting up. 20 minutes passed. Vrecken was breathing harder than he should have been. Not from exertion. Something else. Something that felt like doubt. 30 minutes passed. The observation gallery had gone completely silent. The other Predator students watched with expressions that ranged from awe to confusion to something that looked almost like fear. They had never seen anyone take this much punishment and continue fighting. 40 minutes passed. Una could barely stand. Her left arm hung at an angle that suggested something was broken, or dislocated. Blood dripped steadily from multiple wounds. Every breath she took sounded wet and painful. She raised her guard again. Vrecken felt his heart hammering in his chest. This was wrong. The assessment was supposed to be simple. Attack until submission. He had done this hundreds of times. He had never once felt what he was feeling now. Yield, he commanded, his voice rougher than he intended. She shook her head. I cannot do that. You are injured. You cannot win. There is no purpose in continuing. There is always purpose. She stepped forward. He knocked her down again. She got up again. 50 minutes passed and Vrecken finally stopped. He stood in the center of the arena with his chest heaving and his claws trembling. He'd been trying to break something that did not break. He had been fighting an enemy his species had never evolved to face. Why? He demanded. and his voice cracked with something that might have been frustration or might have been desperation. "Why will you not yield?" Una spat blood onto the arena floor. Her one good eye met his 4 eyes without flinching. "Because you are still standing." The words hit Reckon like a physical blow. He understood then what he was dealing with. Humans were not predators. They did not have claws or fangs or venom. They were not faster or stronger or more deadly than the species who hunted the stars. But they had something else. They had the ability to choose. They could look at pain and decide it did not matter. They could look at impossible odds and decide to fight anyway. They could look at evolution itself and refuse to accept its verdict. This creature was not refusing to submit because she thought she could win. She was refusing to submit because she had decided that submission was not an option. Her will was not shaped by instinct or biology or survival calculations. It was shaped by choice, pure and absolute and terrifying in its simplicity. Reckon looked at this small, broken, bleeding creature who stood before him like an accusation against everything he thought he understood about strength. And he bowed his head to her. It was the first time he had ever bowed to a student. The observation gallery erupted in confused noise. The other instructors demanded to know what he was doing. His own instincts screamed at him that this was wrong. That predators did not bow to prey. But she was not prey. She had never been prey. "Pass," he said quietly. Una did not collapse. She did not even sway. She simply nodded once and then walked out of the arena under her own power. The graduation ceremony was held 3 days later. The official records listed Una Park as the first human to complete Predator Combat Division training. Her species classification was marked as pending review because no one could agree on what to call her. She stood among the predators who had once seen her as prey, and they looked at her as an equal. No, they looked at her as something more. When the ceremony ended and the students dispersed to their new assignments, Instructor Reckon approached Una for the final time. "I have a confession," he said. She looked up at him with her healing face and waited. "The paperwork error was corrected 4 months ago. I received authorization to remove you from this division, but I chose not to file the confirmation. I told myself I wanted to see you fail. I told myself I wanted to see you fail. I think I was lying." Una was quiet for a moment. "What did you actually want to see?" Reckon considered the question for a long time. "I wanted to understand how something so small and soft could refuse to break. I wanted to know what you were made of. I think I finally understand. What am I made of?" His mandibles clicked in the cortex equivalent of a smile. "Will. Pure will. Not instinct, not programming, not biological imperative. Just the choice to keep going when everything else would stop." He handed her a data pad with a document on the screen. It was a new species classification form. Under category, someone had written a single entry in fresh official text: Apex Will. The Galactic Union Military Academy has created a new designation. Reckon explained. "It will apply only to humans for now, but I suspect others may earn it in time." Una looked at the words on the screen 6 months ago. She had walked into a room full of predators with nothing but a paperwork error and a refusal to give up. Now she was leaving with something no human had ever held before: official recognition that humanity was not prey, not predator, something else entirely, something that could look at the universe and choose its own nature. "Thank you, Instructor," she said. "Do not thank me," Reckon replied. "Thank yourself. You earned this. All I did was stop getting in the way." He saluted her in the formal Corthax manner. She returned it in the human style. Then she walked out of the academy and into a galaxy that was finally beginning to understand what it meant to be human. Years later, when journalists asked Instructor Reckon how a paperwork error had resulted in the creation of an entirely new species classification, he always gave the same answer. "It was not an error," he would say. "We simply did not have the correct classification. We do now, and then he would look at wherever the nearest human happened to be, and his mandibles would click in that expression that his students had learned meant respect. Apex were not born chosen, and that made all the difference. The pack hunting trial was designed to test something that many predator species struggled with naturally: cooperation. Most apex hunters evolved as solitary creatures. They competed with members of their own species as much as they hunted prey. The idea of working together, of trusting another being with your survival, went against millions of years of evolutionary programming. This was precisely why the Galactic Union, Military Academy, required it. Modern warfare was not fought by individuals. It was fought by units. Even the most deadly predator was useless if they could not function as part of a team. The target for the pack hunting trial was a simulated megafauna construct, a massive automated creature designed to be impossible for any single hunter to defeat. It had armor that could resist plasma weapons. It had sensors that could detect any approach. It had weapon systems that could kill in a dozen different ways. Most teams relied on overwhelming force to bring it down. They would attack from all directions simultaneously and hope that their combined damage output would be enough to overcome its defenses. This strategy worked. It was also brutal and ugly, and resulted in numerous casualties among the hunters, the top-performing teams. Each year were those who found more elegant solutions. Teams who could coordinate with perfect precision. Teams who could exploit weaknesses rather than simply overwhelming. Strength. Teams who understood that hunting was about intelligence as much as power. Una Park gathered her team in a private training room the night before the trial. Tessic paced with restless energy, her pack hunting instincts demanding action rather than discussion. Keth crouched in a corner and watched everything with all 8 of his unblinking eyes. Soreth perched on a table and tried to make himself even smaller than he already was. I have been studying the construct specifications, Una said. I have also been watching the footage from previous trials. Most teams fail because they treat the target like prey that simply needs to be overwhelmed. They attack with everything they have and hope for the best. That is how predators hunt. Tessic said with an edge of challenge in her voice. I know, but we are not most teams. We have different strengths and different weaknesses. If we try to fight like a standard predator pack, we will lose. Keth made a low clicking sound that indicated interest. What do you propose instead? Una pulled up a holographic display showing the combat arena and the construct's movement patterns. Tessic, you have incredible speed, but your stamina is limited. You cannot maintain pursuit for extended periods. Tessic hissed softly but did not deny it. Keth, you can deliver devastating single strikes, but you are built for ambush once you commit to an attack you cannot easily reposition. The Vorn inclined his massive head in acknowledgement. Soreth, you are small, but that means you can access spaces that larger predators cannot. Your toxins are lethal, but require direct contact to be effective. The Drenix looked up with an expression of surprise. No one had ever analyzed his capabilities as strengths before. What about you? Tessic asked. What are your strengths? Human. Una was quiet for a moment. I am slow. I am weak. I have no natural weapons. But I can keep going when others stop. I can take damage that would make others give up. I can see how different pieces fit together because I have spent my whole life watching predators and trying to understand them. She pointed to the holographic display. Here is my plan. We do not attack the construct directly. We wear it down first. Soreth scouts ahead and reports its position. Tessic uses her speed to harass it and keep it moving. She does not commit to full attacks. She just forces it to react and prevents it from settling into a defensive position. The Skethni's eyes narrowed as she processed this. It went against her instincts to attack without killing. But she could see the logic. Keth positions himself at key choke points in the arena and waits. When the construct is exhausted from chasing Tessic and avoiding Soreth's reports, I drive it toward him. I maintain pursuit no matter how long it Takes until it stumbles into the ambush. And when it reaches me, Keth asked, you end it, one strike, all your strength in a single moment when it cannot evade or defend. The three predators considered this plan in silence. It was not how any of them would naturally hunt. It required trust. It required patience. It required each of them to rely on the others completely. Tessic spoke first. You are asking me to hold back my killing instincts. To herd rather than hunt, this is not what I was evolved to do. I know, Una said, but you are more than your evolution. You have a mind. You can choose to hunt differently if you decide to. The Skethany stared at her for a long moment. Then, she made a sound that might have been laughter. You are strange. Human. Very well. I will try your method. Keth simply nodded. Sorth looked at Una with something that resembled wonder. No one has ever included me in a plan before, he said quietly. They always saw my size as a liability. Your size is why we need you. Una replied. The construct has sensors designed to detect large predators. It will not notice you until it is too late. The morning of the trial arrived, and the teams entered the arena one by one. Most followed the expected pattern. They attacked. Hard and fast. They took casualties. They eventually brought down their targets through pure aggression and acceptable losses. Then it was time for the Misfit team. The four of them spread out across the arena. According to Una's plan, Sorth vanished into maintenance tunnels too small for any other predator. Tessic positioned herself near the construct's starting location. Keth climbed to an elevated choke point and became perfectly still. Una moved to the far side of the arena and waited. The signal sounded and the hunt began. Tessic struck first, darting in and raking her claws across the construct's armor before dancing away. The machine turned to pursue, but she was already gone. It tracked her movement and began to follow. Then Sorth's voice came through the team's communication channel. It is turning toward the eastern passage. Tessic adjusted her position and struck again from a different angle. The construct changed direction. Again and again this pattern repeated. Every time the machine tried to focus on a target, another appeared to distract it. It could not predict their movements. It could not settle into a defensive pattern. Its systems began to show signs of strain. An hour passed and the construct was still fully functional, but its movements had grown sluggish. 2 hours passed and it had begun to make errors in its targeting. 3 hours passed and it was barely able to respond to Tessic's harassment. The observers in the gallery had gone quiet. They had never seen a hunt conducted this way. Una stepped into the construct's field of vision. It turned to face her, and she began to walk toward it. She did not run. She did not try to evade. She simply advanced with steady, inevitable steps. The construct retreated for the first time in the trial. It moved away from a threat rather than toward one. It was tired. Its systems were overheating. It could not process why this small, slow creature terrified it more than the fast, deadly one. Una kept walking. The construct kept retreating. She drove it exactly where she wanted it to go when it stumbled into the choke point. Keth dropped from above like a falling star. All 8 of his limbs drove into the construct's weakened armor with the force of a missile strike. The machine crumpled. It did not get back up. The timer stopped. Fastest completion time of the trial. 0 casualties in the observation gallery. Instructor Vrecken stared at the frozen display showing the 4 misfits standing over their kill. The pack hunter who had learned to herd instead of kill. The ambush predator who had learned to wait. The run who had learned he was needed. And the human who had taught them all. How did she know it would work? One of the other instructors asked. Vrecken did not answer immediately. He was thinking about pack dynamics and about species who hunted alone, learning to trust each other. He was thinking about a human female who looked at 3 predators and saw not what they were, but what they could become together. She did not know. He said finally, she believed, that is different. That is more. In the arena below, Tessic approached Yuna with an expression the human had never seen on a Skethany face. It was not quite respect, it was something deeper. You said you would trust us, Tessic said. You said that is what pack means. I did. I have hunted with my clutch siblings my entire life. I have never heard anyone describe it that way. I thought pack meant shared blood, shared instincts, shared programming, but you have none of those things with us. Yuna looked at the Skethany, and then at Keth and Sorth, who had gathered close. Pack means choosing to rely on each other, she said. It means deciding that together we are more than we are alone. Blood does not make a pack, trust does. And I trust all of you. Tessic was silent for a long time when she finally spoke. Her voice was strange and rough. I believe I am beginning to understand what you are. Human. What am I? Tessic's fangs clicked together. You are the one who makes others believe they can be more than they are. I do not know if my species has a word for that. Yuna smiled. Humans do. We call it hope. 5 weeks into the training program, and the dynamics of the Predator Combat Division had shifted in ways that Instructor Vrecken could not have predicted. The human was not supposed to still be here. She was supposed to have broken by now instead. She had become something that none of the Predator students knew how to classify. She was clearly not one of them. She could not match their speed or their strength or their natural weapons. But she was also clearly not prey. Prey ran, prey gave up when the situation became hopeless. This creature did none of those things. The Predator students had stopped making jokes about her. They had stopped placing bets on when she would quit. Some of them had even started watching her during training exercises with expressions that looked almost like respect. Keth the Vorn was the most obvious example of this change. His species were solitary ambush hunters, who rarely spoke to anyone. Social interaction was simply not part of their evolutionary heritage. Yet on the 5th week of training, he approached the human during a rest period and stood before her in a posture that indicated he wished to communicate. Yuna looked up at the massive 8-limbed creature whose shadow blocked out the overhead lights. She did not flinch or tense. She simply waited. I have a question. Keth said. His voice was deep and rough from lack of use. The translators had to work hard to render his species' clicking sounds into standard speech. Ask it. Yuna replied, Why do you fight? The question seemed to confuse her. What do you mean? I understand why my species fights. Keth explained. We fight for food. We fight for territory. We fight for the right to reproduce. These are biological drives encoded in our cells. But you are not hungry. You have no territory here. You are not seeking a mate. So why do you fight? Yuna was quiet for a long time. The other students in the rest area had gone still. Everyone was listening, even if they pretended not to be. Do you know why I'm called the Miracle Girl? She asked. Finally, Keth's 8 eyes blinked in the pattern that indicated negative. When I was 12 standard years old by human counting, Yuna said. I was supposed to travel with my older brother on a shuttle to visit our extended family on a colony world. I was excited because I had never been off-planet before, and my brother promised to show me the stars from space. She paused and looked down at her hands. The night before we were supposed to leave, I got sick, some minor virus that made me too weak to travel. My parents decided I would stay home and take the next shuttle a week later. Keth waited. The other predators waited. The shuttle my brother was on suffered a catastrophic malfunction during transit. Everyone aboard died. There were no survivors. The silence in the room was complete now. Even the environmental systems seemed to have gone quiet. My family started calling me their Miracle Girl because I had survived something I was supposed to die in. But I never felt like a miracle. I felt like I was living on borrowed time, like the universe had made a mistake and I had somehow gotten extra days that were meant for my brother. Yuna looked up at Keth with those strange human eyes that held depths the predators were only beginning to understand. I joined the military because I felt like I owed a debt. The universe gave me time I should not have had, so I decided to spend that time protecting others. I decided to become strong enough that maybe someday I could save someone else the way I was saved by a random illness and bad timing. Keth processed this information for a long time. His species did not have a concept of debt to the universe. They did not understand guilt or obligation or the strange human need to find meaning in random chance, but he understood one thing clearly: this creature fought because she chose to, not because her biology demanded it, not because her instincts compelled it. She simply looked at the universe and decided that she would fight for something beyond survival. It was the most alien thing he had ever encountered. It was also strangely compelling. "I do not understand your reasoning," Keth said finally, "but I respect that you have reasons at all. Most prey simply runs. They do not think about why they run. They do not question whether running is the right choice. You think and you choose and then you act. That is not what prey does. What does that make me then?" Yuna asked. Keth had no answer. He returned to his section of the training ground and did not speak again for the rest of the day. But something had changed in the way he looked at the human. Something had changed in the way all of them looked at her. Meanwhile, Instructor Vrecken sat in his office and stared at a notification on his screen. The expedited paperwork for Yuna Park's transfer had been fully processed. All he had to do was forward the confirmation to the administrative office, and she would be removed from his division within the day. His claw hovered over the confirmation key. He thought about the blood trial and the way she had walked through fire and pain. Without stopping, he thought about the look in her eyes when she said she had already survived things that should have killed her. He thought about what Keth had said about prey and choice. His claw moved away from the confirmation key. He marked the notification as received and filed and closed the screen. The human would stay. He told himself this was because he wanted to see how far she could go before she finally broke. He told himself this was purely professional curiosity. He refused to acknowledge the other possibility, that he was beginning to see something in her that challenged everything he believed about the nature of strength. The next morning, the announcement came through the barracks communication system. The next major assessment would be the pack hunting. Trial students would form teams of 4 and work together to bring down targets that no individual could handle alone. Team formation would be voluntary. This meant the predators would choose their own partners. Yuna sat on her bunk and prepared for the inevitable. No one would choose her. She would be assigned to whatever team had empty slots. She would drag them down with her inadequacy. She was ready to accept this. Then a shadow fell across her. She looked up and found Tessic standing before her. The Skethany female who had called her prey on the first day now looked at her with an expression the human could not read. "You will be on my team," Tessic said. It was not a question. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. "Why?" Yuna asked. Tessic's venom fangs clicked together in what might have been irritation or might have been something else. "Entirely. Because I have watched you for 5 weeks and I still do not understand what you are. I want to understand. The only way to understand a hunter is to hunt beside them." She turned and walked away before Yuna could respond. Within the hour, 2 more predators had approached. Keth simply stood beside her bunk until she acknowledged him and then nodded once to confirm his intention to join Sareth. The small Drenix came last. He was the run of his species and had been excluded and mocked. His entire life, he looked at the human who was even smaller than him and said, "If they will have me, I would like to hunt with you." Yuna looked at the 3 predators who had chosen her: the pack hunter, the ambush predator, and the outcast runt. They were not choosing her because she was strong. They were choosing her because they were curious, because she represented something they did not understand, because she made them question things they had never questioned before. It was not the same as being accepted, but it was close enough. "All right," Yuna said. "Then let us figure out how to hunt together." For the first time since she had arrived at the academy, she felt something that was almost like hope. Instructor Vrecken stood at the front of the combat hall and let his 4 eyes scan the roster on his datapad. One final time before his new students arrived, the Predator Combat Division of the Galactic Union Military Academy accepted only the most dangerous species in known space. These were beings evolved for violence across millions of years. Natural weapons grew from their bodies, like gifts from cruel gods. Killing instincts ran through their blood like fire. Vrecken himself belonged to the Korthax, a species of apex hunters whose scales could stop plasma rounds and whose claws could tear through starship hulls. He had commanded Predator units for 30 cycles and had never once questioned the natural order of things. Some species were hunters. Some were prey. The universe had made this distinction long before any of them had learned to build starships. The door slid open and his new students began to enter. First came the Vorn called Keth, an 8-limbed nightmare of chitin and muscle who moved with the silence of a shadow despite weighing more than a ground transport. His species ambushed prey from above on their jungle homeworld, dropping onto victims before they could even scream. Behind him walked 2 Skethany, sleek pack hunters with elongated skulls and fangs that dripped paralytic venom. The female was named Tessic, and she moved with the confident grace of someone who had never known fear. Adrenix skulked in next, smaller than the others, but no less deadly with his razor-sharp quills and toxic blood. Several more predator species filled the remaining seats, each one a perfect killing machine shaped by evolution and hunger. Vrecken felt the familiar satisfaction of commanding such power. Then the door opened one more time. A small figure stepped through and stopped just inside the entrance. She looked down at her datapad, then up at the room number displayed above the door, then back at her datapad again. She wore the standard gray uniform of an academy cadet, and her dark hair was pulled back in a simple tie. She could not have been more than 20 standard cycles old by human reckoning. She stood barely as tall as the chest of the smallest predator in the room. Vrecken watched her walk to an empty seat and sit down as if this were perfectly normal. His mandibles froze mid-click. He looked at his roster again. There was an official text that could not be argued with Park. Unispecies, human designation, apex predator, transfer origin, medical support division. He read it 3 more times because surely his translator was malfunctioning. Humans were classified as endurance persistence hunters. They were not apex predators. They did not belong in his division. They belonged in support roles where their strange stamina and problem-solving abilities could be useful without getting them killed. He pulled up her transfer file and found the source of this madness, an administrative processing error had occurred somewhere in the vast machinery of military bureaucracy. Someone had entered incorrect data. Someone had failed to verify. Someone had allowed a human female from the medical division to be reclassified and transferred into the most lethal combat program in the entire academy. The other students had noticed her now. The room fell into a different kind of silence. This was the silence of predators who had spotted something that did not belong. Tessic rose from her seat and moved closer to the human. She leaned down until her elongated skull was level with the small creature's face and inhaled deeply through the sensory slits along her jaw. She smells like prey, Tessic announced to the room. Several of the other predators made sounds of agreement or amusement. The human looked up at the Skethany who towered over her. She did not flinch or lean away. She did not show the fear response that Tessic's species had evolved to trigger in lesser beings. Instead, she wrinkled her small nose and said, "You smell like you skipped decontamination." The room went completely still. Tessic's venom fangs extended slightly in reflexive threat. The human continued to meet her gaze with those strange flat eyes that humans possessed. No slit pupils, no heat vision, no threat display at all, just calm, steady observation. Vrecken decided he needed to end this before blood was spilled on the first day. Cadet Park. He called out, His voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The human turned to face him. "There has been an error in your assignment," he continued. "You do not belong in this division, and you will be transferred immediately." The human stood and approached him with her datapad extended. "Instructor Vrecken," she said, "I am aware that my transfer seems unusual, but I have reviewed the documentation, and it has been officially processed through all required channels. That documentation is incorrect. With respect, Instructor, incorrect or not, it is now official military record." Vrecken felt his scales ripple with irritation. He pulled up the transfer correction protocols on his own device and began the process of fixing this absurd mistake. Then he stopped the correction procedure required. Verification from 17 different administrative offices across 4 separate stations. Estimated processing time, 6 standard months. He could not simply remove a student whose paperwork, whose technically valid military bureaucracy, did not care about biological reality. It cared about proper documentation. The human watched him with what he was beginning to recognize as patience. Humans were famous for patience. It was one of the few things that made them slightly less pathetic than they appeared. "You will remain in this division until the correction is processed," he said finally. "But understand this, Cadet Park. The Predator Combat Division does not slow down for anyone, does not adjust its standards for anyone, and does not protect anyone from the consequences of their inadequacy. I understand." "Instructor, do you truly understand?" he asked, leaning down until his armored face was close to hers. "In this division, we train to kill efficiently and without mercy. We hunt the most dangerous enemies of the Galactic Union. We do not coddle the weak or mourn the fallen. You are soft and small and breakable. What makes you think you can survive even 1 week among us?" The human met his gaze without wavering. "Because I have already survived things that should have killed me, Instructor." She returned to her seat. Vrecken watched her go and felt something cold settle in his chest. It was not concern. Predators did not feel concern for prey. It was simply the discomfort of disorder in his perfectly ordered domain behind her. The other predators had begun to whisper among themselves. The Vorn, called Keth, watched her with all 8 of his eyes in a way that suggested calculation rather than hunger. Tessic had settled back into her seat but kept her sensory slits pointed toward the human as if tracking a potential meal. The smaller Drenix, whose name was Soroth, seemed almost fascinated. He was the run of his species and had faced exclusion his entire life. Perhaps he recognized something in this creature who did not fit. Vrecken called the class to order and began his introduction to the program. He explained the expectations and the training schedule and the assessments that would break those who did not belong throughout his speech. He found his eyes returning to the small human who sat among monsters and took notes on her datapad as if this were any other class. The other students were already making bets on how long she would last. The general consensus was 3 days before she broke and requested transfer to a safer division. Vrecken did not participate in such speculation. He was a professional, but privately he thought 3 days was generous. He had no way of knowing that in 6 months he would look back on this moment and realize he had been the one who did not understand what he was dealing with. The Predator Division was about to learn something new about the nature of survival, and none of them were prepared for the lesson. 2 weeks had passed since the human called Una Park had walked into Instructor Vrecken's classroom and refused to leave. She had survived the basic combat drills by taking hits that would have broken lesser beings and simply getting back up. She had endured the physical conditioning by moving slower than everyone else, but never stopping. She had faced the daily hostility of Predator classmates who saw her as an insult to their division's prestige, and now she stood at the entrance of the blood trial arena, looking impossibly small against a massive doorway designed for creatures 3 times her size. The blood trial was the first major assessment of the Predator Combat Division. It was a combat gauntlet that tested everything a hunter was supposed To-be students entered a massive maze filled with automated prey drones and hostile environmental hazards. They were scored on speed, lethality, and efficiency. The fastest and most deadly clearance would claim the top rank. The slowest would face consequences that could include removal from the program. Vrekin stood in the observation gallery above the arena with the senior instructors. They had come specifically to watch the human fail. Everyone wanted to see how badly she would embarrass herself. "This is cruel," one of the other instructors said. "She should have been removed on the first day. The paperwork requires 6 months to process." Vrekin replied, though he knew this was not entirely true anymore. The expedited correction had already been approved. He had simply chosen not to file the final confirmation. He told himself this was because he wanted to see the natural order assert itself. He wanted the human to admit her own inadequacy and request transfer voluntarily. It had nothing to do with the strange way she had looked at him when she said she had already survived things that should have killed her. The first students began their runs. The Vorn called Keth moved through the maze like a living shadow. His 8 limbs carried him up walls and across ceilings where he dropped onto drones from above and tore them apart with brutal efficiency. He cleared the course in 14 minutes with a perfect lethality score. The Skefny pair went next and worked together in perfect coordination. Tessic drove prey drones toward her partner, who waited in ambush with venom ready. They finished in 16 minutes. The Drax named Sorath struggled more than the others because of his smaller size. But his species' natural toxicity meant any drone he touched died within seconds. He finished in 22 minutes. One by one, the Predator students demonstrated why evolution had made them perfect killing machines. Then it was the humans' turn. Unipark stepped into the arena with nothing but her standard training uniform and the basic equipment allowed to all students. She had no claws to tear with. She had no venom to inject. She had no armor to protect her. She had no enhanced senses to track her prey. The observation gallery fell silent in anticipation of what everyone assumed would be a humiliating disaster. The starting signal sounded and Yuna began to move. She did not explode into action like the Predators had. She did not sprint or leap or attack with overwhelming speed. She simply started walking forward at a steady pace. A prey drone emerged from behind a barrier, and she pursued it. The drone was faster than her. It evaded easily and disappeared around a corner. Any predator would have been frustrated by this failure. But Yuna simply changed direction and followed. She tracked the drone through 3 different sections of the maze. When obstacles blocked her path, she found another route and continued. She took damage from environmental hazards and kept moving. Blood ran from a cut on her arm and she did not slow down. 30 minutes passed and she was still following the same drone. The observers began to shift with confusion. This was not how hunting worked. Hunting was about speed and power and the sudden violence of the kill. Hunting was not about walking steadily after prey until 1 hour had passed. Then 2 hours. Then 3. The predators in the gallery grew restless and agitated. They could not understand what they were watching. Tessic's sensory slits kept flaring as if she expected to detect some hidden strategy. But there was nothing hidden about what the human was doing. She was simply refusing to stop in the arena below. The drone Yuna had been chasing finally began to slow. Its systems were not designed for extended evasion. It was built to test quick predatory strikes, not endurance. The drone's movements became sluggish and erratic. It stumbled. It fell. Yuna caught up to it and shut it down with a single strike to its power core. Then she turned and began pursuing the next one. By the 4th hour, the observers had stopped talking. By the 5th hour, even Vrekin had risen from his seat to press closer to the viewing screen. One by one, the drones that had evaded this slow, persistent creature began to fail. Their systems overheated. Their power reserves depleted. Their evasion protocols broke down from repeated use. Yuna collected them all with patient, relentless inevitability. The final drone tried to hide in a section of the maze designed to discourage pursuit. Hazards activated around it fire and electricity, and crushing barriers meant to force predators to choose different prey. Yuna walked through them all. Her uniform was torn and burned. Her skin was cut and bruised. One of her eyes had swollen partially shut from an impact. She did not stop. When she reached the drone, it had nowhere left to go. She shut it down with hands that shook from exhaustion, but did not hesitate. The final count registered on the display above the arena: total target elimination, 100%. Equipment used, none. Time elapsed, 5 hours 47 minutes. It was the worst completion time in the history of the blood trial. It was also the only time any student had ever achieved total target elimination without using any specialized equipment whatsoever. The observation gallery was silent for a long moment. Then Soreth, the small Drenix, began to make a sound that his species used to express awe. Reckon stared at the display until the numbers burned into his memory. He had watched this human do something that should have been impossible. She had not hunted like a predator. She had hunted like something else entirely, something that did not need claws or venom or speed, something that simply chose its prey and then refused to let it survive. That night in the barracks, Tessic approached Yuna while the human was treating her many wounds. The Skethany's posture was different than before. There was no threat display. There was something that might have been curiosity in the way her head tilted. "How?" Tessic asked. Simply. Yuna looked up from wrapping a bandage around her burned forearm. "How? What? How did you keep going?" "I watched your vital signs on the monitor. Your pain levels should have stopped any sane creature hours before the end. How did you continue through that?" Yuna was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My grandmother survived a war when she was young. She walked for weeks through destroyed cities with no food and no water, and wounds that never properly healed. She told me that pain is just the body asking a question. The question is whether you want to stop. The answer is up to you." Tessic processed this information for a long time. Her species did not understand suffering as a choice. Pain was a signal to stop doing whatever caused it. The idea that pain could be a question you could answer differently was entirely foreign to her. "Your grandmother," Tessic said finally, "was she also a predator?" Yuna smiled in that strange way humans did when they found something both sad and meaningful. "No," she said. "She was just a survivor like me." Tessic returned to her section of the barracks and did not speak again that night. But she did not look at the human like prey anymore. She was not sure what to call her instead. She only knew that she had never seen anything like this before, and that knowledge made her deeply uncomfortable.